He was the millionaire's only son. And he had never walked a single step in his life. Doctors gave up, experts failed. Until a humble woman, with no medical training, did something that left the entire mansion speechless. Sir Jonathan Whitmore was one of the wealthiest businessmen in London, owning chains of luxury hotels and exclusive country estates. His only son, Edward, was born with a rare condition that left him unable to walk. From birth, doctors had said there was no cure, and the boy would spend his life in a wheelchair. Jonathan spared no expense: private physiotherapists, top surgeons, and the most advanced medical equipment, but nothing worked. By the age of 10, Edward had accepted his fate, and his smile had grown rare. His mother, Lady Margaret, kept him surrounded by love but could not hide her tears at night. The Whitmore mansion was filled with elegance, but its air carried an unspoken sadness. Staff members whispered that no miracle could ever come. Yet, miracles often arrive in unexpected ways. One chilly autumn morning, the Whitmores hired a new housemaid named Grace Holloway. Grace was in her early 40s, with plain clothes, worn shoes, and a gentle smile that seemed to warm the coldest day. She had grown up in a small Yorkshire village and had no formal medical training. Her duties were simple: clean rooms, tend to laundry, and keep the kitchen spotless. On her first day, she saw Edward in the drawing room, quietly sketching by the window. Unlike other staff who avoided staring at his wheelchair, Grace knelt beside him, introduced herself, and asked about his drawings. Edward was surprised. No one had spoken to him like that in years. In that moment, a quiet bond began. Over the next few weeks, Grace noticed something the others missed. Edward's legs would twitch slightly when he was excited or when she made him laugh. Most assumed it was involuntary, but Grace saw possibility. She began talking to him about the countryside, describing hills, streams, and meadows she had walked as a girl. "You'd love the feeling of grass under your feet," she said one afternoon. Edward gave a faint smile, but his eyes showed a longing he didn't admit aloud. Grace's own life had been full of hardships. She had cared for her ill father until his passing, learning patience and determination in the process. She believed that sometimes the heart could push the body further than the mind allowed. One rainy day, when Lady Margaret was away and Jonathan was at a business meeting, Grace asked Edward if he'd like to try something different. She took him to the library, where the carpet was thick and soft. "We'll do this slowly," she said, placing two sturdy chairs close together for balance. Edward looked nervous but agreed. Grace guided his hands to the chair backs and gently encouraged him to push himself upward. At first, his legs trembled and his arms bore all the weight. After a few seconds, he sat back, panting but smiling faintly. "We'll try again tomorrow," Grace promised. Days turned into weeks, and their secret practice continued. Grace mixed their sessions with stories, tales of people who overcame impossible odds. From miners trapped underground to sailors lost at sea. Edward began to believe he could try a little more each day. His muscles, weak from years of disuse, began to respond. He still needed the wheelchair for most of the day, but during their sessions, he could stand for longer periods. Grace's encouragement was never harsh. She clapped for even the smallest progress. "The day you take your first step, I'll be the loudest cheer in all of England," she would say with a grin. One evening, Jonathan returned home earlier than expected. As he walked past the library, he froze. There was his son, standing, holding onto a chair, while Grace stood nearby, her face lit with pride. Jonathan's eyes widened, and for the first time in years, hope surged through him. How did you do this?" he asked, his voice trembling. Grace simply replied, "I didn't do it, sir. Edward did. I just believed he could." Jonathan felt something shift in his heart. All his wealth had failed. Yet this humble woman had brought his son further than any expert. From that day, Jonathan insisted on joining their sessions. But Grace still led them. She introduced new challenges: small steps between chairs, holding balance without support, and even attempting to walk with her steadying hand. Edward stumbled often, but he laughed now, instead of growing frustrated. The household staff began to notice the change. The boy who once avoided company now asked them to watch his progress. Lady Margaret returned from a trip to find her son taking 3 shaky steps toward her. She burst into tears, kneeling to hold him tightly. "You're my miracle," she whispered. The news spread quietly at first, then more widely. Friends of the family visited and saw Edward walk short distances. Specialists who had once given up returned, puzzled by his progress. Grace refused any credit. "He had the strength all along," she told them. "He just needed someone to remind him it was there." But Jonathan knew better. Without Grace's unwavering belief, Edward might never have tried. One evening, he called her into his study and offered her a significant sum of money as thanks. Grace shook her head. "I didn't do it for money, Sir Jonathan. I did it because I care." Months later, Edward walked into the garden unaided for the first time. The winter frost was melting, and the grass was damp beneath his shoes. Grace followed at a respectful distance, letting him savor the moment. "I can feel it," Edward said softly, his eyes glistening. "The ground, the air. It's like I'm alive in a new way." Jonathan, watching from the terrace with Margaret, had tears streaming down his face. All the grandeur of his estate seemed insignificant compared to the sight before him. It was a victory that no check could buy. Years later, Edward became an advocate for children with disabilities, telling his story at schools and charities. Grace still worked for the Whitmores, though she was now more a beloved member of the family than an employee. At a public event, Edward was asked what had changed his life. He glanced at Grace and smiled. "One humble woman did the impossible. She believed in me when no one else did." The crowd erupted in applause. Grace lowered her gaze modestly, but her heart swelled with quiet joy. Sometimes, the greatest miracles are born from kindness, not skill.